It's the one thing I didn't check today prior to class. All right, so those of you guys that are on live stream, apologize, I did not have the sound on. I just did an opening and kind of letting everybody know what we're going to be doing in class today, which is studying the words of the Buddha, volume 3, chapter 11 through 20. So we're going to start off with meditation. I'd like to invite you to join for meditation. And you can either sit on the floor, perhaps sit in a chair, maybe do lying or standing position. You'd like the body to be comfortable, not luxurious and not painful, but comfortable, with the lower body, hands and arms relaxed, and the upper body erect. Then close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. I'm going to do some chanting to ease us into meditation, and then I'll be back with some just brief guidance. If you know these chants, you're welcome to join along. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanang Apivadeyami Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakato Rokavito Anutero Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatawa Manusranang Bhoto Bhagavati. Right, you like to just be breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just establishing the breath, a gradual, nice, steady, consistent breath, a natural breath. Breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Your breath isn't going to necessarily match up with the guidance that I provide, and that's okay. This is your practice. So wherever you get to your next inhale, just breathe in gradually through the nose. And then whenever you get to it, exhale, experiencing the full breath. Once the breath is established, fixate the mind on the sound of the breath or the sensation of air moving into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath the present moment. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you observe that the mind moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, analyze it, judge it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Just wherever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath. Breathing in and out. หังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาเขวาพุทธังมหาเขวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาเขวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเขวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสัคคะโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรปุริสาดามาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังโพโตภะคะวะติ Right, if you guys would like to gradually make your way out of meditation, we'll go ahead and transition over to the studying of the words of the Buddha. We're in volume 3, chapters 11 through 20 today. And the way that we do our class is that a student will typically volunteer to read a chapter. Then after that, I will share some teachings on that chapter and then open up to any questions that you guys have. And the way that you ask questions is you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, or you can raise your hand in Zoom or raise your hand electronically, and then I'll be able to see you and you'll be able to ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. So if there's somebody who would like to volunteer for this to read it in Zoom, if you could raise your hand, that'd be great.
Donnie wants to volunteer to read the first chapter.
Okay, great.
Chapter 11, 4 sources of depletion and accumulation of the wealth. The 4 sources of depletion of the wealth. The wealth thus amassed has 4 sources of depletion: womanizing, drunkenness or heedlessness, gambling, unwholesome friendship, unwholesome companionship, unwholesome comradeship. Just as if there was a huge reservoir with 4 inlets and 4 outlets, and a man would close the inlets and open the outlets, and sufficient rain does not fall, one could predict the water in the reservoir to decrease rather than increase. So the wealth thus amassed has 4 sources of depletion: womanizing, drunkenness or heedlessness, gambling, unwholesome friendship, unwholesome companionship, unwholesome comradeship. The 4 sources of accumulation of the wealth. The wealth thus amassed has 4 sources of accumulation. 1 avoids womanizing, 1 avoids drunkenness or heedlessness, 1 avoids gambling, 1 cultivates wholesome friendship, wholesome companionship, wholesome comradeship. Just as if there was a large reservoir with 4 inlets and 4 outlets, and a man would open the inlets and close the outlets, and sufficient rain falls, one could predict the water in the reservoir to increase rather than decrease. So the wealth thus amassed has 4 sources of accumulation. One avoids womanizing, one avoids drunkenness, heedlessness, one avoids gambling, one cultivates wholesome friendship, wholesome companionship, wholesome comradeship. These are the 4 things that lead to the welfare and peacefulness of a householder in this very life.
All right. Thank you, Donnie. So remember everything with the teachings of the Buddha. He's guiding you to understand the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, or action and result. Essentially, the results of your decisions, because it's your life, your decisions, and then you experience whatever results you experience based on your decisions. So the Buddha is providing you guidance on the path to enlightenment in order to train the mind and develop this ideal life, so to speak. And you'll decide for yourself what that ideal life is like. But as long as the mind is having pollution in mind, and one of those pollutions is a lack of wisdom or this ignorance or unknowing of true reality about the natural laws of existence, specifically the natural law of karma. If you're unknowing of true reality of this natural law, then you're going to make unwise decisions that lead to certain unwholesome results. And when you have wisdom of this natural law, you will naturally make wiser decisions that lead to wholesome results. We did the same exact thing with the natural law of gravity as we were growing up as children. We didn't understand the natural law of gravity, so we made unwise decisions and we experienced unwholesome results. We fell down, we busted our elbow, we busted our head, our knee, we broke our toys, we knocked over glasses of water or milk or other things like this. But slowly but surely, we gained the wisdom of this natural law, and then we started making wiser decisions to the point now where we make sure our shoes are tied, we look at the surface where we're walking, we learn to gradually ride a bicycle. We can probably fly all over the world because we understand this natural law of gravity now. We make wiser decisions because we have this wisdom. And this was gradual training, gradual practice that then led to gradual results of us being able to accumulate this wisdom of the natural law of gravity. Well, the path to enlightenment, you're doing essentially the same thing where you're gradually learning about these natural laws that the Buddha taught. And here, when he's talking about the accumulation of wealth, that in order for you to live a peaceful and joyful life, which is the enlightened mind, is going to be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, no longer experiencing any anger, frustration, irritation, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, shyness, jealousy, resentment, and all these other discontent feelings. You would need to develop a life where you have a certain amount of income to sustain your life and to take care of the people around you. So here he's guiding his students on how to ensure that they're not just wasting their money and what we might say, throw it in the street, so to speak. So here he's giving 4 things that leads to the depletion of your wealth. And here he's talking to a male, so he's referring to womanizing. But if we are a female, we could also look at this as, chasing around lots of men and kind of blowing our money just to kind of maybe have, casual sex or partying and different things like this, because that's essentially what womanizing is. Same thing with drunkenness or heedlessness. This is where we might be using drugs or alcohol because the mind becomes heedless during that situation. And now we're more likely to spend our money and blow our money on erroneous things that aren't life-sustaining, that aren't beneficial to our life. And the same thing with gambling. When we're gambling, the mind has a craving, a longing and yearning for more money. And the more money that we put out gambling, the more we will typically lose. And then we can't actually use that money for life-sustaining things that are beneficial for our life. And then if we have unwholesome friends or companions or comrades, this is like certain associates that you might have. If they're into unwholesome things, then you're going to tend to do those unwholesome things too. So general guidance and advice would be that as you make friends and as you maintain your friendships, be sure that your friends are practicing at least the 5 precepts. They might not know them as the 5 precepts with the Buddhist teachings. If you know the Buddhist teachings, you might know the 5 precepts in the way that the Buddha taught, and you're practicing those. But if you choose to be friends or associate with people who aren't practicing those, that means your choice to be their friend is going to affect you. So the real rudimentary translations of the 5 precepts are that we don't kill, we don't steal, we don't have sexual misconduct, we don't lie, and we don't take substances that cause heedlessness. But there's much deeper understanding of these 5 precepts that you can learn through the words of the Buddha and other books and other resources that I share. In fact, this particular book, the 5 precepts are in here at a later chapter that we're going to be studying, but I more fully explain them in volume 1, chapter 7. You can see the words of the Buddha because his language is much more illuminating. It's not a black and white thing about these 5 precepts. There's a lot of gray area that you need to understand in order to wisely practice those teachings. And you would like to ensure that any people that you're associating with, that they're practicing along these lines as well, because their decisions can impact you. And if you maintain unwholesome friendships and associates, then their unwise decisions are going to affect you. But it's your decision to be their friend that is affecting you. So these are the 4 things that the Buddha is saying this leads to depletion of wealth. And then the exact opposite, when you don't do these things, when you avoid womanizing, drunkenness, gambling, and you cultivate wholesome friendships and associates, this is where you can accumulate money because you're no longer just wasting it on unbeneficial things that the Buddha is describing here. What questions do you guys have on this chapter? You can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, Tonka.
I was wondering about who is experiencing the consequences of our actions of karma. Since there is no self, so it must be then it's this body-mind that is experiencing the consequences of these actions. But at the same time, body-mind is temporarily, but then our actions affect the future lives, right? If we do better deeds in this life, probably we'll have future lives in a better environment. So it's a little bit confusing to me who is experiencing the consequences of our karma here.
Okay, so the universal truth of non-self is giving you the solution or the antidote to the pollution or taint or defilement in the 10 fetters described as personal existence view. This is where the mind is falsely believing that this body and or this mind is you. So this self-image and self-identity, the mind is clinging to it. So therefore, when you hear agreeable things, there's pleasant feelings. When you hear disagreeable things, there's painful feelings. But that's not to say that there isn't a human being here. That's not to say that there isn't a person here that is experiencing certain things in the world. There is a body and there is a mind that comes together, and this is what we call a person. So there is a person here that is experiencing the results of our decisions. The universal truth of non-self is just to help the mind to be trained to let go of clinging to the self-image or the self-identity, because as long as the mind is doing that, then it's going to experience discontentedness.
Okay, thank you, Teacher David. And just if you have any guidance, how are our actions affecting the future lives?
Sure.
But
So
if body mind are temporarily, then how does it get transferred into the future lives?
Sure. So any decisions that we make, we're going to experience the results of those. We can't run and hide from our karma or the results of our decisions. We're going to experience those decisions in this life, our next life, or some subsequent occasion, which is some future life. The goal would be to get to enlightenment by training your mind, getting wise about this natural law of karma, of cause and effect, train the mind to get to enlightenment so there is no longer any rebirth. And as part of that, what you're doing is you're extinguishing all your unwholesome karma by only making wise decisions through the Eightfold Path. It's the Eightfold Path that as you learn and practice this, you're only making wise decisions. And now you're producing more and more wholesome karma where you've extinguished all your unwholesome karma. So the mind will move into this enlightened mental state where it'll be peaceful and joyful for the rest of this life. And there'll be no more unwholesome results coming back to you because you've extinguished all your unwise decisions. But if you don't get to enlightenment in this life, which means there's still craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind, these are the three poisons, then there is going to be future rebirth. It's craving, that mental longing and strong eagerness, the chasing after the objects of your affection, the thinking that the next new shiny object around the corner is going to provide some lasting satisfaction. These cravings, desires, attachments, the mind is holding on. That's the fuel that causes the next rebirth. So at the death, if there's craving in the mind, there will be another life. At the time of death, you can think of the craving and memories in the mind as being in a cardboard box. And now when that cardboard box is dilapidated or the body is dead, essentially the mind is done, the cravings and residual memories from that mind are now moved to this new mind. So now in this new life, and it takes sometimes many years, many hundreds of years sometimes before that person is reborn or till that consciousness finds a new birth. When there's a new birth, let's just say into a human realm, the cravings and residual memories are in the mind of that new being. And now that new being is making decisions based on cravings that were in existence in their previous lives. So it's not like the natural law of karma is this punishment and rewards or this black cloud that's following you around from life to life to life or this mystical magical thing. Instead, whenever you make decisions through craving, anger, and ignorance, it's going to produce unwholesome results for you. So the fact that one didn't get to enlightenment in a previous life, that is an unwise decision because it leads to rebirth. And now those cravings or residual memories move into the new mind. Now that new being is making new decisions based on cravings from the past. So let me give you, in experiencing karma in that new life based on past cravings. So let me give you an example. Let's say that there was an individual named Barbara who in a previous life, she was not very active sexually, for example. And let's just say that she always had a craving for sexual activity, but she never really fulfilled it. She never really kind of went forward with that. So now that she's died, she still has those cravings and many other cravings and reborn into a new being named Bob. And now this new being Bob grows older and older. And as they get older and sexually mature, they still have these cravings from the previous life of when they were Barbara. And now Bob starts acting on those cravings. And maybe Bob is sexually active and having lots of different partners. And now they're going to be experiencing the unwholesome results of those unwise decisions. Maybe they experience STDs. Maybe they have multiple relationships. Maybe they're cheating on people. Maybe they're lying. Maybe they're treating their partners unkind. And by the time this person gets older, maybe they lack the ability to have people that are close to them, and they're kind of lonely and bored because they don't have that many people around them. And this would be how your karma from a previous life moves forward to a new life, is that it's the craving in this new life that is producing new decisions because the cravings weren't extinguished. So unwise decisions are always going to come from craving, anger, and ignorance, where wise decisions are going to come from the opposite of those, which are generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. So when we function through the wholesome roots, then we will experience wholesome results.
Okay, thank you very much. It's clear now.
By the way, Tonka, are you planning to moderate, I think, for today's class?
Yes, I'm watching YouTube and Facebook for any questions here.
Oh, okay. So should I go ahead and do the organization part of the class and call on people, or is that something that you were planning to do?
If you don't mind, I can read the second chapter.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do that then. Thank you for your help. All right.
You're welcome.
So here's chapter 12.
Space of wasting one's substance. householder's son, and which are the 6 ways of wasting one's substance that the noble disciple does not follow. Addiction to strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, is one way of wasting one's substance. Haunting the streets at unfitted times is one. Attending fairs is one. Being addicted to gambling is one. Keeping unwholesome company is one. Habitual idleness is one. Householder's son, there are these 6 dangers attached to addiction to strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness. Present waste of money, increased arguments, liability to sickness, loss of good name, indecent exposure of one's person, weakening of intellect, wisdom. Householder's son, there are these 6 dangers attached to haunting the streets at unfitted times. One is defenseless and without protection. And so are one's wife, life partner, and children, and so is one's property. One is suspected of crimes. False reports are pinned on one. One encounters all sorts of unpleasantness. Householder's son, there are these 6 dangers attached to frequenting fairs. One is always thinking, where is their dancing? Where is their singing? Where are they playing music? Where are they reciting? Where is their hand clapping? Where are the drums? Householder's son, these are the 6 dangers attached to gambling. The winner makes enemies, the loser regrets his loss. One wastes one's present wealth. One's word is not trusted in the community. One is despised by one's friends and companions. One is not in demand for marriage because a gambler cannot afford to maintain a wife, life partner. Householder's son, there are these 6 dangers attached to keeping unwholesome company. Any gambler, any glutton, any drunkard, any cheat, any trickster, any bully is his friend, his companion. There are these 6 dangers attached to idleness. Thinking it's too cold, one does not work. Thinking it's too hot, one does not work. Thinking it's too early, one does not work. Thinking it's too late, one does not work. Thinking I'm too hungry, one does not work. Thinking I'm too full, one does not work.
All right. Thank you, Tonka. This is a chapter that's connected to one that we studied last week, where wasting one's substance is wasting your vitality, your vital energy, and your efforts. When you are producing certain decisions in life, you are experiencing certain results. And if we're wasting our vitality, then we're not doing things and producing decisions that lead to certain beneficial results for our life and the life of those around us. So the Buddha talked about these 6 things last week in one of the chapters that we studied, and we talked and discussed about what these things are. But here in this chapter, the Buddha is explaining the effects that if one is using and addicted to substances that cause heedlessness, these are the things that one will experience as a result of that. And if you've ever been addicted to substances, you can independently verify and see for sure that this is indeed the truth of what he's explaining. And he does this with each individual aspect of what he's describing. So these are pretty self-explanatory, I think, but let me just talk about this one, because this was a topic of discussion last week when we were talking about entertainment. Because during the lifetime of the Buddha, frequenting fairs was the only type of real entertainment that they had, where nowadays we have all kinds of entertainment. What you can see the Buddha is describing here, and what I talked about last week, is the mind craving and longing and yearning. If the mind gets used to always going to entertainment, and the mind gets bored or it gets lonely, and then you use going to the movies to fill that void, or you use listening to music to fill that void. The reason why the mind is experiencing that boredom and loneliness is because of the craving, desire, attachment in the mind. There's a longing and yearning that the mind is longing for something and it doesn't have what it wants, so therefore it experiences this boredom or loneliness or other discontent feelings. So as long as the mind is longing and yearning, chasing after entertainment, then like the Buddha is saying here, the mind's going to be craving. Where is dancing? Where is singing? Where is playing music? Where is reciting? Where is hand clapping? Where are the drums? These are things that they did during that lifetime. So it's not that you can't ever do entertainment or enjoy entertainment, but you may get to a point in time in your practice where you choose to drastically reduce it and even perhaps even eliminate it for a period of time. You might eliminate it for 6 months, a year, 2 years. Train the mind to not be bored or lonely, be inwardly fulfilled, be inwardly content, inwardly peaceful, inwardly joyful, regardless of having those things, and that you don't need those things in order to be inwardly peaceful and joyful. And then once you see the mind has overcome any cravings and it's not experiencing the boredom and loneliness anymore, you might decide to bring those things back in, but you'll probably do it selectively at that point because your mind's not relying on these things. Where now you might actually be relying on these things, whereas if you're cleaning the house, you might turn on some music to kind of occupy the mind. Or if you're working on the computer, you might have some music playing in the background in order to occupy the mind, which this is not helpful for the mind because it's having to switch back and forth between the music and whatever you're doing on the computer, or cleaning and listening to the music. It's switching back and forth. So what you would like to do for a period of time, whenever you get to it, it doesn't have to be today or tomorrow, but if you would like to kind of observe the mind and see if there's any boredom or loneliness coming into the mind, is you can reduce and ultimately eliminate entertainment for a period of time. And then once you see over a period of time, maybe 6 months, a year or so, that the mind has no longer experiencing this boredom and loneliness, it's no longer craving for music or for entertainment, then you might decide to selectively bring it back in. So that can be really helpful for you to understand that aspect of what the Buddha is teaching here. And then here he's expanding and explaining to you about the 6 dangers attached to keeping unwholesome company. What he's meaning here is unwholesome friends. And whenever you're choosing to have people in your life, you should never be judgmental and looking down on people. That would be unwise. But instead of judging people and looking down on them, making yourself superior or inferior, you can make wise decisions. This is discernment about who you choose to involve in your life. So if you choose to involve any of these types of individuals, which is what the Buddha is explaining, then this is going to cause problems in your life. So if you see that certain people are into these type of things, it would be wise to choose not to be involved with individuals who are experiencing these type of things. Again, we're not looking down on them. We're just realizing that for our life, if we involve people like this in our life, then it's going to produce unwholesome decisions because of our unwise decision to be friendly or be friends with an individual like this. We should be friendly with everybody, but to include people in your life and be close friends with somebody that's into these type of things, that would be unwise. So if you guys have questions on any of the others of these, we can discuss them, but I think they're pretty straightforward. If you guys have questions, feel free to put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. We'll be able to see those, and then be sure your question gets asked during the class or answered during the class. All right. Are you seeing any questions, Tonka?
No question at this time.
Okay. All right. So let's go down to the next one, which is chapter 13. Would somebody like to read this one?
I can, sir.
Sure. Go for it, Max.
Okay. 5 chords of sensual pleasure. Monks, there are 5 chords of sensual pleasure. What are the 5? Forms recognized by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of craving. Sounds recognizable by the ear that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of craving. 3. Odors recognizable by the nose that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of craving. 4. Flavors recognizable by the tongue that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of craving. 5. Physical objects recognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of craving. These are the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. As to those ascetics and Brahmins who are tied to these 5 chords of sensual pleasure, obsessed with them and completely committed to them, and who use them without seeing the danger in them or understanding the escape from them, it may be understood of them. They have met with calamity, met with disaster. The evil one may do with them as he likes. Suppose forest deer who was bound lay down on a heap of traps. It might be understood of him. He has met with calamity, met with disaster. The hunter can do with him as he likes. And when the hunter comes, he cannot go where he wants. As to the ascetics and Brahmins who are not tied to these 5 chords of sensual pleasure, who are not obsessed with them or completely committed to them, and who use them seeing the danger in them and understanding the escape from them, it may be understood of them. They have not met with calamity, not met with disaster. The evil one cannot do with them as he likes. Suppose a forest deer who was unbound lay down on a heap of traps. It might be understood of him. He has not met with calamity, not met with disaster. The hunter cannot do with him as he likes. And when the hunter comes, he can go where he wants. Suppose a forest deer is wandering in the forest wilds. He walks without fear, stands without fear, sits without fear, lies down without fear. Why is that? Because he is out of the hunter's range. So too, quite distant from sense desires, distant from unwholesome mental states, enters and resides in the first jhana, which is with thinking and pondering, based in seclusion, filled with excitement and joy. This monk is said to have blindfolded Mara, to have become invisible to the evil one by depriving Mara's eye of its opportunity. This follows with the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana. The space is infinite. The consciousness is infinite. The base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. The discourses are identical except for the reference to each attainment. Again, by completely surmounting the base of neither perception nor non-perception, a monk enters upon and resides in the elimination of perception and feeling, and his taints are destroyed by his seeing with wisdom. This monk is said to have blindfolded Mara, to have become invisible to the evil one by depriving Mara's eye of its opportunity, and to have crossed beyond attachment to the world. He walks without fear, stands without fear, sits without fear, lies down without fear. Why is that? Because he is out of the evil one's range.
All right. Thank you, Max. So let's first talk about central desire. Then we'll talk about the 5 chords of central pleasure and then move into the rest of this chapter. In the 10 fetters, which are the 10 individual pollutions that the Buddha discovered that keeps the mind trapped in the unenlightened state, he also provides the solution to how to eliminate those 10 fetters. And that's what you're working to accomplish on this path to enlightenment. All of his other teachings, whether it's the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Five Precepts, and meditation and everything else, is leading to the elimination of these 10 fetters. He doesn't necessarily call it out, but the more you understand what the individual 10 fetters are, you can see things like the Five Precepts are guiding you to eliminate certain fetters. One of the primary fetters that are in the 10 fetters is called sensual desire. This is where the mind is longing and yearning with craving, desire, attachment through the sense bases. The sense bases are the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind. There are 6 individual sense bases. And the mind has this longing and yearning, wanting agreeable contact through the 6 sense bases. If it gets the object of its affection, then it gets pleasant feelings. But if it gets disagreeable contact through the 6 sense bases, then it will experience these painful feelings. So for example, there are certain forms that you see with the eyes. If you see a beautiful sports car, perhaps you get pleasant feelings. But then if that car gets in a crash or an accident, this is disagreeable to the mind, so it sees this disagreeable form, so it experiences perhaps painful feelings. And your particular cravings are unique to you. So you're going to have certain cravings, desires, attachments that are in the mind that you're longing, yearning through these sense bases in order to acquire the objects of your affection. You get what you want, that's the craving, desire, attachment is fulfilled, then you get that conditional pleasant feeling like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, euphoria, and others. If you don't get what you want, then the mind is meeting with this disagreeable contact, so it experiences painful feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, and others. So in order to eliminate that central desire, you need to do a lot of different training in order to eliminate that. In this path to enlightenment, the Eightfold Path is helping you to learn how to do that. Here, the Buddha is explaining the 5 chords of central pleasure. This is the craving, desire, attachment itself. It's not the actual object. The object, for example, the car, is not the attachment, or the mobile phone, or your children, or your life partner. They aren't the attachment. It's the mind's longing and yearning for certain things. That's the chord. So here the Buddha is just helping you to understand that the mind has this craving, this desire, this attachment, this wants, these expectations, this longing, yearning through these sense bases. The mind is longing through these, wanting the objects of its affection. And here the way he explains it is forms recognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of craving. So this is what he's describing, that your mind is longing through these sense bases. And he explains each one individually. And he says, these are the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. And he says, if you are tied to these, he's referring to aesthetics and Brahman, but it's really anybody that's tied to these, that the mind is obsessed with them and committed to them without seeing the danger in understanding the escape. The escape is the Eightfold Path in the training to eliminate this fetter of sensual desire. It may be understood of this person who's obsessed with these sensual pleasures, they have met with calamity, met with disaster. This is because you're going to experience discontentedness. You're going to experience discontentedness as long as the mind is longing through the sense bases, wanting the objects of your affection and wanting agreeable contact, because sometimes you're going to get what you want and you're going to get conditioned pleasant feelings, but because of impermanence, you can't always get what you want. You're sometimes going to meet with disagreeable contact. So that means the mind's going to experience painful feelings. So that's why he's saying that this person is met with calamity or met with disaster. And then he's referring to Mara, the evil one, because Mara, this being that the Buddha describes as the evil one, they're interested in causing calamity. They're interested in causing and influencing unwholesome things in the world. They're going to try to influence your mind in order to be enticed by these sensual pleasures. And this is an actual being. It's a formless being. in other traditions, you might refer to it as the devil or Satan, that this being is going to try to influence you and grab you through enticing you with various things that will make the mind long and yearn. And then if you're making the decisions to chase after those things, the Buddha is explaining that just like a deer is trapped and this hunter can do anything that they want with this deer, then the evil one, Mara, is essentially the same way, that it can do anything it wants with you because it now has you trapped by these sensual pleasures. And each individual unenlightened mind is going to have this central desire. And your work on this path, among other things, is to eliminate this fetter, where your mind is no longer pulling in the direction of the objects of its affection, but you can restrain the mind and you can see that the mind is doing that. And this is where the peacefulness, the calmness, the serenity and contentedness with joy comes into the mind, because as long as you're longing and yearning, you're sometimes going to get the objects of your affection and sometimes not. So you're going to be experiencing these conditioned feelings. Down here, he talks about one who is distant from sensual desires, distant from unwholesome mental states, and he describes the rest of it. He describes that one who enters into the first jhana, which is this preliminary phase that the mind experiences before it moves into the other jhanas and then ultimately to the first stage of enlightenment. He says that once you get into the first jhana, your mind has been essentially trained enough that it will no longer be able to be influenced by this evil one or Mara, that you've essentially blindfolded Mara by getting the mind into the first jhana. And by getting the mind into that first jhana, now this being can't do what it wants with you because you've blindfolded it. It can't even see you. And then he talks the same way about all these other attainments, the entire 4 jhanas, and there's additional attainments here that I explain in other parts of this book series. So let me see what questions you guys have on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can electronically raise your hand in Zoom. Looks like Max, you have your hand up. You can go ahead with your question.
So I could help moderate Zoom if you'd like.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, there is a question in the Zoom chat from Lori. She, I believe it was on the last chapter about discernment. She says, I wondered about discernment. Is it being judgmental when we get upset with the person for not seeing what or who they were about, or what they were about right away? I mean, if we got close to them, then realized later that they were about forming a relationship.
Yeah, so this is having wrong view, that if your mind becomes angry based on something that somebody else does, then you're causing your own anger, that craving, desire, attachment, the longing, yearning. The mind has certain wants or expectations of this person. And now when the mind experiences this anger, it will typically falsely attribute those painful feelings to the other person. And then what an individual will typically do is push that person out of their life. That is aversion. Or they will push the situation out of their life. Or they will become bitter and harsh or aggressive or hostile. And then because of that, the individual will choose to leave your life. So this is all because of wrong view and the mind not understanding the very first teaching on the path to enlightenment, which is the 3 universal truths and the 4 noble truths. If you deeply establish right view and the mind no longer has wrong view, then you will understand any anger or other feelings that you experience are all being produced in your own mind. So that is important for you to establish. Judging somebody would be to put yourself above them or put yourself below them. This is part of the conceit. This is another pollution in the mind that the Buddha describes in the 10 fetters, where there's arrogance, there's pride, there's judging, there's measuring and comparing somebody and putting yourself above or below that individual. So that's what I would share with you on that, is if you haven't already learned in the group learning program and in volume 1, in volume 1 of this book series, I share the 4 noble truths, and there's videos that have been recorded and there's podcasts and things like this where you can hear me teaching those things. Tomorrow in Sunday's class, I'm going to be reviewing the Four Noble Truths just briefly before we move into the entire Eightfold Path. So that might be a good opportunity for you to learn in tomorrow's class at the same time. But if you would like to even learn that today, you can look at our YouTube channel or the podcast and you can see where I've taught those things in the past, because you'll need to establish right view through understanding the three universal truths and the Four Noble Truths.
I believe that's all the questions we have at this time, sir.
Okay. Thank you for doing that moderation, Max. All right, so we'll go on to the next chapter, which is chapter 14. Would somebody like to read this one?
Can we
I
this
can
one?
read that.
Oh, go ahead, Tonka.
Okay. 5 factors of well-spoken speech. Monks, possessing 5 factors, speech is well-spoken, not badly spoken. It is blameless and beyond reproach, disapproval by the wise. What 5? It is spoken at the proper time. What is said is true. It is spoken gently. What is said is beneficial. It is spoken with a mind of loving kindness. Possessing these 5 factors, speech is well spoken, not badly spoken. It is blameless and beyond reproach, disapproval by the wise.
Okay, thank you, Tonka. This is an elaboration of right speech. On the Eightfold Path, which is the core central teaching of the Buddha, he shares all the different factors that one needs to develop in order to move the mind closer and closer to enlightenment and ultimately attain enlightenment. One of those steps is called right speech. And what he's sharing with you is the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, or action and result, of how to improve our communication. During his lifetime, it was right speech because that's all they had was speech. Nowadays, we have text message, email, social media posts, we have speech, we have phone calls, all different kinds of things. So in the Eightfold Path, he shares 4 aspects of right speech. He teaches not to lie. He teaches not to have slander or gossip. He teaches not to have harsh speech, and he teaches to eliminate frivolous speech. Because whenever we're speaking in any of those ways, we're causing harm, so therefore harm comes back to us. We're not able to have a fulfilling life as long as we are speaking in unwise ways, which is going to produce unwholesome results. But then after you bring your practice up to that on the Eightfold Path, and now you're not causing harm through your speech using those 4 aspects of right speech in the Eightfold Path, then you would like to deepen your practice of right speech and start to understand the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. This is common for the Buddha, that he'll teach in layers. And as you pull back these layers, you get deeper and deeper into his teachings. And here, if you understand the proper time, what this means is that you ensure that you're not interrupting people, that you're speaking at a time when your mind is prepared to speak, so that if you were angry or frustrated or irritated, that's the wrong time to speak. Or also understanding the other person's mind, that if you have some impactful discussion or conversation that you need to have, that you ensure that their mind's prepared to have that. And you might need to ask them questions to see if it's a good time for them to talk about something. Speaking the truth, this is ensuring that you're a true speaker, that you're one to be relied on and not deceiving people. This is very important because as long as you're speaking untruths, people are going to discover those untruths. And when they discover those untruths, then they're not going to be able to trust you and see you as dependable. So your personal and professional relationships will struggle. You'll also find that as you're speaking untruths, you're going to have to remember what you said to one person versus another, and your mind will be overactive, constantly trying to figure this out. So you're not going to be able to be peaceful and joyful with an enlightened mind as long as you're speaking untruths, because you're not going to be able to just speak the truth in every single situation that you're in. Speaking gently is based on our tone, our tempo, and our word choice, ensuring that we're speaking with a tone, tempo, and word choice that is gentle, because as long as we're harsh in our speech, this is going to cause harm to others, and harm is going to come to us. So by speaking gently, we can then ensure that our personal and professional relationships blossom. Same thing when we speak beneficially. This is purposeful speech. The opposite of this would be like frivolous speech or idle chatter. This is where the mind has a certain craving, a longing and yearning, and you might just yada 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 yada, right? If you're doing that, it's going to be unpurposeful or unbeneficial, and people are going to just tune you out, and you'll notice that you won't be influential in the way that you communicate with people. So ensuring that you're speaking beneficially and purposefully is going to really help you in your relationships. And then ensuring that you're speaking with a mind of loving kindness. The opposite of this would be speaking with a mind of inner hate. If you're speaking with a mind of inner hate, then that's going to come out in your tone, your tempo, your word choice. You'll probably be hostile or aggressive or bitter, and this is going to weigh on your relationships. So you would like to speak with this genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. That's what loving kindness is. That's active goodwill. And if you're practicing all 5 of these and you tune in your mind more and more to practicing this, you'll see that all your conversations will be very wholesome. Now, there'll be a certain situation where somebody else isn't practicing these teachings and they might have difficulty speaking to you in certain ways, but you should reside unaffected. If you know that you're practicing the 5 factors of well-spoken speech and this other person is responding to you in a harsh and aggressive way, without understanding this wisdom, you might be thinking, gosh, what happened? Why did that person speak to me that way? You might start feeling guilty or shameful. But if you know in multiple conversations over many months and many years, you've been speaking with the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, if a conversation starts to erupt and that person starts to become hostile or bitter, you will know that their mind is causing that themselves. Even if you weren't practicing the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, their mind is still causing that themselves. But you can rest assured that you are practicing the 5 factors of well-spoken speech in your personal and your professional relationships, and then you'll see your relationships really blossom. What you're working to establish here is what Thai people refer to as barami. Barami is the one who people listen to. If you practice the 5 factors of well-spoken speech and all the other teachings that the Buddha is sharing with you, understanding the natural law of karma, bringing your practice up closer and closer to that, you'll find that your relationships will be wonderful because you won't be causing harm to others, so therefore harm won't come to you. Your mind will be fully protected because you will know that for an extended period of time you've been speaking with the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. So if your life partner or your neighbors or your parents, your brothers or sisters, if they're continuing to be harsh and aggressive, which they may do for a period of time, you need to maintain your calmness and your composure and ensure that you're practicing the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. And this is where you'll see that you can be more influential in your relationships. But as long as you're not using the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, you'll find that you'll be argumentative, that you'll be harsh, that people won't really listen to you, they won't really trust your words, and you'll have challenges in your relationships. But you can improve that by training the mind and dialing this in closer and closer throughout your days, your weeks, and your months, and getting more and more proficient with this. Initially, it'll be a bit of a challenge, but then eventually, as your mind is doing this more and more, you'll be able to do this with ease. It'll just be natural. It'll be first nature for you to always be speaking this way. What questions do you guys have on this chapter?
I don't see any questions at this time, sir.
Okay. I'll go ahead and move on to the next chapter then. You can see all the words here that I'm sharing to help you understand this. So that's why it's helpful to read these chapters ahead of time. We'll go to chapter 15. Who would like to read this one?
I can read this one.
Great,
The
Dinah.
Tathagata's speech. So too, Prince, such speech as the Tathagata knows to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, and which is also unwelcome and disagreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not speak. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true and correct, but unbeneficial, and which is also unwelcome and disagreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not speak. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true, correct, and beneficial, but which is unwelcome and disagreeable to others, the Tathagata knows the time to use such speech. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, but which is welcome and agreeable to others, Such speech the Tathagata does not speak. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true and correct, but unbeneficial and which is welcome and agreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not speak. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true, correct, and beneficial, and which is welcome and agreeable to others, the Tathagata knows time to use such speech. Why is that? Because the Tathagata has compassion for all beings.
All right. Thank you, Donnie. So here, the Tathagata is the Buddha. This is how he referred to himself. The word Tathagata, for the best of our understanding, means the one who discovered the truth, or the one who shares the truth. Because when he's teaching, he's sharing the truth, and he discovered this truth through his own practice. That's what makes a Buddha a Buddha, is that they independently discover the teachings, they dedicate the rest of their life to sharing those teachings, and countless people get to enlightenment during their lifetime, and then they preserve the teachings such that countless more people can get to enlightenment after their death. So here he's referring to himself as the Tathagata. And what he's sharing with you is a deeper understanding of this right speech, because he's got right speech in the Eightfold Path. He's got the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, which we just discussed. And now this is a deeper understanding of the speech that would produce wholesome results in your life, and how you can gain wisdom around how to speak, and that way it'll produce wholesome results. And you see the Buddha's sharing the reason why he speaks in this way is because he has compassion for other beings, all beings. What compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. So one of the things that you're doing on this path is not only training your mind, but you're also training your mind to be able to interact with unenlightened beings, because unenlightened beings, which the vast majority of the world is unenlightened, they're going to have a lot of difficulties when somebody speaks to them. And you really need to be aware of your speech, because they can get angry or hostile or bitter in any one little thing, any kind of little situation that isn't exactly right or exactly perfect. Their mind can become irritated or annoyed. Of course, they're causing that themselves, but you would like to practice in such a way that there's less likely of a chance for them to become discontent. Even though sometimes these beings will become discontent, you're not causing it, but you would like to remove any kind of things in your practice that could potentially contribute to their discontentedness. Of course, they're causing it themselves, but you can create conditions in which it is more unlikely than not that they would actually get discontent. So here, the Buddha is saying when there's something untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, he does not speak that. And that's because it doesn't meet the threshold of the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, because it's untrue, it's incorrect, and it's unbeneficial. But here, if something is untrue and correct, but yet it's unbeneficial, he also doesn't speak this, because it doesn't meet the threshold of the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, because it's unbeneficial. But here, where there's something that's true, correct, and beneficial, but yet it's unwelcomed and disagreeable to others, he knows the right time to use that speech, because this is that part of the 5 factors of well-spoken speech of knowing the right time to speak. You need to know the mind of this other person, and sometimes it requires you to learn their mind or ask them questions to know that it's the proper time to say a certain thing. Then he says, okay, if it's untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, of course, even if it's welcomed and agreeable to people, he's not going to speak that. If it's true, correct, and it's unbeneficial, even though it's welcomed and agreeable to others, he's not going to speak that. But when something is true, correct, and beneficial, and it's welcomed and agreeable to others, he also knows the right time to use that speech, because sometimes if you say things that are true, correct, and beneficial in a certain situation, even though it's welcomed and agreeable, it can arise ego in the mind of that person, and now you need to deal with their ego, right? So being able to understand your own mind and train your own mind and understand and see these different fetters and eliminate them, you become very wise about being able to observe the mind of another person and know when it's wise to say certain things and when it's wise not to say certain things, based on whether it's unwelcomed and disagreeable to people or whether it's welcomed and agreeable to people. So this is part of your practice that you might not necessarily choose to dive into right now, but if you've already feel like you're really proficient with the 4 aspects of right speech and the Eightfold Path, and it's been a consistent long-term period where you've been practicing the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, maybe 6 months, a year or so, and you've been practicing those and observing that you're doing that each individual relationship, it might be the time for you to now start practicing this and get deeper into your practice of right speech, where you start observing the mind of another person and you selectively decide what you're going to say and when you're going to say it based on whether it's welcomed and or unwelcome to this other person. So it looks like we have some hands up. Go ahead, Tonka, if you have some questions.
We have a question from Amina on Facebook. A question about well-spoken speech. When sending messages via email, how do we consider the factor of proper time? To give an example, a teacher and I were connecting in a positive way via email regarding a racist statement that a child made in our child's class and determined steps to use the issue as a learning opportunity for all the students. The mind was clear to follow the 5 factors, but was curious about proper time, as we can never know when our messages are received when they are electronic.
Okay.
Would to be respectful that teachers have free time outside of school and not cross boundaries.
Okay, so a few things here, Amina. In terms of speaking at the proper time, remember I shared that we don't interrupt, that we make sure our mind is ready to talk, and that it's the proper time for the other person, right? So interrupting with an email, that doesn't happen, right? Because you're just sending an email. But the second one is making sure your mind's ready to type out an email. So if you experience any annoyance or irritation or frustrated, that's not the right time to type out an email. Step away, or if you're going to write it out and you need to get it out, just save it as a draft and put it in your draft box. Come back a couple of days later and look at that again when your mind's had an opportunity to calm down. And then in terms of the other person's mind, you don't necessarily know what's going on in their mind. So if you're speaking about something that you feel that might be impactful to them, it's usually best to spread it out. So if they've written you an email and now you need to reply to them, wait 2, 3, 4 days before you reply back. Let them experience some other things and kind of not hold on to this topic. Especially if it's a pretty contentious topic, which can be impactful in people's lives and experience, or it's requiring them to do some type of work, give it some space to breathe. Oftentimes, people feel like they need to reply back to somebody right away. This is the craving in one's own mind. But if you give it some space, a few days, maybe even a week or so, this can give the other person's mind time to calm down, so that when you reply to them, if they choose to then open that email, their mind is potentially in a better situation. But when they choose to open the email is up to them. So you're not going to know whether they're on a break or what have you, but if they're choosing to open their email, they've chosen to open their email, right? So that's a choice on them. But you can increase the odds of it reaching somebody whose mind is prepared to digest it by spacing it out a bit. And one other thing I was going to mention there, I remember you mentioned the word boundaries, Amina. This is something that is talked about in today's society. This is not part of the teachings of the Buddha, because what a boundary is and what people are describing as boundaries is it's basically their expectation. It's their want. It's their craving. And people are going around trying to teach everybody what their boundaries are. This is essentially trying to train everyone in the world to do things your way, right? So if somebody has boundaries, right away you should be thinking craving, desire, attachment, wants, expectations. And your role in life is not to figure out what other people's cravings are, what their boundaries are, and not cross those, right? It's wise to understand what people are craving and what they have certain desires and attachments are. But if they get angry because of that, that's on them. You would like to practice in such a way that you're practicing the path to enlightenment. And if somebody else is imposing their expectations or boundaries on you, this is their craving. And it's not wise to fulfill that, because in some cases you're going to be able to fulfill it and they're going to get happy. And then there's other cases where you're not going to be able to, and they're going to get angry and sad or frustrated, and they're going to potentially blame you for that. So be aware of that for your own practice, that you're not having boundaries. You can just make wise decisions, and you don't have to think of this as boundaries, because those are just cravings. And where you see other people having boundaries, understand that that's their craving, and that's not necessarily wise for you to subscribe to fulfilling somebody else's craving. You have a question there, Donnie?
Yes, teacher. Could you give an example for number 5, please?
Let's see. Speech, as the Tathagata knows to be true, correct, but unbeneficial, in which is welcomed, agreeable to others. Let me think. Let's see, something that's true and unbeneficial and is welcomed and agreeable. Well, let's just say you think somebody is so handsome, right? And you've seen them many times. You've mentioned to them that they're handsome. And if you continue to say this, it may be true, it may be correct, but is it beneficial? It's welcomed and agreeable to them, but is it beneficial to constantly tell this person that they're handsome? Because it's going to arise ego in their mind, potentially, if they're not practicing these teachings.
Okay, got it. Thank you, teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that may be all the questions we've got at this time, sir.
Okay, so we'll move to the next chapter then.
I can read, sir.
Okay, go for it, Max.
4 qualities of a wholesome person. Monks, one who possesses 4 qualities can be understood to be a wholesome person. What for? 1. Here, monks, a wholesome person does not disclose the faults of others even when asked about them. How much less than when not asked? But when he is asked about them, then, led on by questions, he speaks about the faults of others with gaps and omissions, not fully or in detail. It can be understood. This individual is a wholesome person. 2. Again, a wholesome person discloses the virtues of others even when not asked about them. How much more than when asked? But when he is asked about them, then, led on by questions, he speaks about the virtues of others without gaps and omissions, fully and in detail. It can be understood. This individual is a wholesome person. 3. Again, a wholesome person discloses his own faults even when not asked about them. How much more than when asked? But when he is asked about them, then, led on by questions, he speaks about his own faults without gaps and omissions, fully and in detail. It can be understood. This individual is a wholesome person. 4. Again, a wholesome person does not disclose his own virtues even when asked about them. How much less than when not asked? But when he is asked about them, then, led on by questions, he speaks about his own virtues with gaps and omissions, not fully or in detail. It can be understood. This individual is a wholesome person. One who possesses these 4 qualities can be understood as a wholesome person.
All right, thank you, Max. Here, this is related to speech as well. And it's all about being humble and ensuring that you're not slandering and gossiping people, and you're not being boastful about your own qualities. So this first one, he says, a wholesome person does not disclose the faults of others, even when asked about them. This is like in your casual relationships, your friends, your family, things like this. You might be in a professional situation where you need to give a person a review, and that review, the intention behind it is to help this person to become more and more successful and improve. So you might need to share something in a professional environment, but you should share that in a professional way that is uplifting and motivating rather than degrading or diminishing. So a wholesome person, what the Buddha is describing, does not disclose the faults of others. Essentially, they don't slander, they don't gossip people. And that's what the Buddha is suggesting that you do, because if you slander and gossip people, then that's going to come back to you and it's going to be harmful. The second one that he's talking about is does not disclose, a wholesome person discloses the virtues of others even when not asked. This is like talking positive about other people. As your mind becomes more and more enlightened, you should be able to see the positive in everybody. Even if I saw a parent standing on a street corner beating their child, even though I disagree with what they're doing, I can see the wholesome in that wow, this parent really is interested in this child doing good. They're, in my opinion, making an unwise decision to beat their child because that's not going to help them to do good. They need wisdom in order to make wise decisions to improve their conduct and the way that they do things. But you can at least see the wholesomeness in that individual. So as your mind becomes more and more awake, you should be able to see the wholesome in everybody. Going around and speaking negative of others isn't going to promote beneficial results in your life, whether it's in a professional relationship and professional environment or in a personal relationship or personal environment. If you're speaking virtuous of others, even when people aren't asked, when you discuss and share the virtues of others, this is going to bode well for you because you're speaking in a way that is uplifting and encouraging of other people. And then in terms of being humble for yourself, the Buddha teaches a wholesome person discloses his own faults, right? So this is like knowing where you need to do work. You don't need to go around and tell everybody what your faults are. But if you came to your teacher, that you would be willing and able to share with your teacher certain challenges and difficulties and struggles that you're having. Sometimes students try to look so great in front of others, including their teacher. They try not to expose the areas where they're having difficulties or challenges, but you should use your teacher in just the opposite. You should tell your teacher all the challenging things, all the struggles, all the difficulties that you're having, because that's how you improve. That's how you get better. If you were to hide these things, you wouldn't be able to get the wisdom of knowing how to overcome those. So you can disclose your faults, meaning you're aware of your faults. You're aware of the things that you need to work on. You're aware of the struggles. You don't need to go around and tell everybody about those, but you should have somebody that you work with or multiple people that you might be working with in order to overcome those challenges and struggles by cultivating wisdom. Then a wholesome person does not disclose his own virtues even when asked about them. This is remaining humble. If you have certain wholesome qualities or certain virtues, if you went around and boasted about those, that would be the arrogance and the pride, and you would have difficulties in your personal and professional relationships because people would see that you have this ego, this arrogance, and this pride. So remaining humble is the way to ensure that you're not going around being boastful. What questions do you have on this chapter? It looks like Tonka has a question. You can go ahead, Tonka.
I was wondering, Teacher David, you mentioned if we see a parent beating up their child, that they want good for their child. So does it mean that people always have good intentions, no matter what kind of actions they are performing? Like, is it how we should look at that?
Do you think that everyone always has good intentions?
I don't think so, but that sounded like that's what you said, because you said even if someone is beating up a child, they have good intention, they want the child to be well, but they don't know how to handle that. So that kind of implied that everybody has good intentions all the time. That's why I'm asking, I'm bringing the question.
Yeah. So I didn't say those things. So it's good you're asking it's good you're asking that question. What I was sharing is that even in a situation like that, I can see that a parent is really interested in their child doing good things. So because of the universal truth of impermanence, it wouldn't be possible for everyone to always have good intentions. That's not possible because of the universal truth of impermanence, that there's going to be people that have unwholesome intentions. But what you should train your mind to be able to do is see the wholesome in everybody. What tends to happen when the mind is in the darkness and it's polluted with these 10 fetters is we go around and we see all the problems with our coworkers. He's not doing that. She's not doing that. Or friends or family, right? We, in the unenlightened state, we tend to focus on the negative qualities of people. And what the Buddha is teaching you to do here is to not do that, is to look at the wholesome qualities, eliminate that negative thinking. And what I was giving you is an extreme example of, even in an example where a parent might be hitting their child, while I disagree with their decision, I can see the wholesome quality that their mind must truly be interested in this child doing good, but they're just unwise about how to allow that to happen. They don't have the wisdom that they need to provide this child guidance, and that's how the child's going to make wiser decisions. So in the past, there's parents who we've been taught or we've experienced ourselves where we got beat, and that was what we thought as human beings is going to produce beneficial results for our children. But what we've learned over time, and what you can see in the teachings of the Buddha, is that this isn't going to produce beneficial results. A parent hitting their child is never going to produce beneficial results. But even in that situation, if you've trained your mind, you should be able to see the wholesomeness that, okay, this person is interested in seeing their child do good things, but they're just lacking the ability of knowing how to incentivize that and encouraging that and providing the child the wisdom that they need to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you, Teacher David. So it's more like to look for good in others.
Right. Look for the wholesomeness, look for the virtues in others, because there's too much negativity in the world, right? And you're not interested in being that kind of person. You're interested in looking at the virtues in others and seeing their virtues. And if somebody asks you, hey, Tonka, do you have some suggestions on how I can improve my relationships or improve my work or something like that? You're going to need to assess whether it's, what you're going to share with them is welcome and agreeable, or is it unwelcome and disagreeable? If you're going to share some guidance with somebody, you're going to need to usually share some really, areas of virtue and wholesome things and wise things that they're doing, and maybe share a few things that they can improve. Because if you just went in with the things that they could improve, they might look at that as criticism or negative and degrading, and this is going to be challenging for you in relationships. So if you can look for the virtues in people, then you can think positively of other people, even though each individual person who's unenlightened, they're struggling in the world. They're a work in progress. So if you're unenlightened, then you are a work in progress as well. So what the ego wants to do is walk around and think that it's better than everyone else and look down on other people and think negatively of others and identify the negative qualities in others and then share those negative qualities with others as a way of putting yourself above that person. Sometimes we think in the unenlightened state is the way for us to shine is to diminish other people. And this is very detrimental to one's practice. Instead, what the Buddha is teaching is to see the virtues in others and share those virtues about others. And then about your own virtues, remain humble about those, and see the areas that you need to improve, investigating those areas that you need to improve, and then keep working on those things.
Okay, thank you, Teacher David. And maybe I can read the next chapter.
Sure. Chapter 17. Let me do this. Let me do this, Tonka, just based on the time. This is actually the exact opposite of the one that we just talked about. The one that we just talked about were 4 qualities of a wholesome person. This is 4 qualities of an unwholesome person. And the Buddha is explaining just the opposite, which an unwholesome person discloses the faults of others even when not asked about them. And an unwholesome person does not disclose the virtues of others, even when asked about them. An unwholesome person does not disclose their own faults. They're not aware of their own faults, their own areas that they need to improve. An unwholesome person discloses his own virtues. This is being arrogant and prideful and boastful. Discloses his own virtues even when not asked about them. So that's what this whole chapter is about. And we don't necessarily need to read this, but we can go on to the next one, Tonka, and you'll be able to read that one. Yeah, so let's go to number 18.
Do not go by oral tradition. Come, Kalamas, do not go only by oral tradition, by lineage of teaching, by hearsay, by collection of scriptures, by logical reasoning, by presumed reasoning, by reason deep thinking, by acceptance of a view after pondering it, by seeming competence of speaker, or because you think this person is our teacher. But when Kalamas, you know for yourself, these teachings are unwholesome, these teachings are blameworthy, responsible for wrongdoing, these teachings are denounced by the wise, these teachings, if accepted and undertaken, lead to harm and discontentedness, then you should abandon them. What do you think, Kalamas, for him, for his welfare or for his harm? For his harm, Venerable Sir, Kalamas, a craving, greedy person overcome by craving, greed, with mind obsessed by it, destroys life, takes what is not given, transgresses with another's wife, and speaks falsehood, and he encourages others to do likewise. Will that lead to his harm and discontentedness for a long time? Yes, Venerable Sir. What do you think, Kalamas? When anger, hatred arisen in a person, is it for his welfare or for his harm? For his harm, Venerable Sir. Kalamas, a person who is full of anger, hate, overcome by anger, hatred, with mind obsessed by it, destroys life, takes what is not given, transgresses with another's wife, and speaks falsehood, and he encourages others to do likewise. Will that lead to his harm and discontentedness for a long time? Yes, Venerable Sir. What do you think, Kalamas, when ignorance, delusion, and knowing of true reality arisen in a person? Is it for his welfare or for his harm? For his harm, Venerable Sir. Kalamas, a person who is unwise, deluded, overcome by ignorance, delusion, and knowing of true reality, with mind obsessed by it, destroys life, takes what is not given, transgresses with another's life, and speaks falsehood, and he encourages others to be likewise. Will that lead to his harm and discontentedness for a long time? Yes, Venerable Sir. Come, Kalamas, do not go only by oral tradition, by lineage of teaching, by hearsay, by a collection of scriptures, by logical reasoning, by presumed reasoning, by reason deep thinking, by the acceptance of a view after pondering it, by the seeming completeness of a speaker, or because you think this person is our teacher. But when you know for yourself, these things are wholesome, these things are blameless, not responsible for wrongdoing, these things are praised by the wise. These things, if accepted and undertaken, lead to welfare and peacefulness, then you should live in accordance with them.
All right, thank you, Tonka. So this is essentially what I teach students from the very first time when they start learning with me, is to never believe anything that I share, never believe anything that you see written in a book about the Buddha's teachings, never believe any of that stuff. What you do is you learn, you reflect to independently verify, and then you practice to accumulate wisdom. The Buddha's giving you detail on this, is to not go by the oral tradition, because if you only go by the oral tradition and what somebody says, you haven't done the work to investigate the teachings and independently verify them, you don't know what's true or what's false. If you go by a lineage of teachers, meaning that there's multiple people that have been passing knowledge down and this person is part of this distinguished lineage, again, you haven't investigated the teachings. You're just believing whatever this person says. Same thing with hearsay, same thing with the collection of scriptures, by logical reasoning, by presumed reasoning, by reasoned deep thinking, by acceptance of a view after pondering it, by a seeming competent speaker, because you think that this person is our teacher, therefore I should believe them. That's not the way you're going to get to enlightenment. Instead, you need to learn with a teacher. You need to realize this is an independent practice, that you're on this journey on your own. You're not a follower. You're not following your teacher. You're a practitioner, someone who is looking for the truth. And by learning with a teacher, then you reflect on what they share, they independently verify that, and then you practice it and see the truth for yourself. That way, you know what is true and what is false. You're not going by just belief. And if you know for yourself, which is what the Buddha is suggesting and what I've encouraged students to do, the things that are unwholesome and unwise, then you know for yourself what are the true teachings that lead to enlightenment, things that lead to discontentedness. And then the Buddha is asking this student questions to see if they understand about craving, anger, and ignorance. Asking if craving arises in a person, is this good for their welfare or does this cause harm? And of course, it causes harm. And then if a person has this anger or hatred, same thing. And then ignorance and delusion, because these are the three unwholesome roots or the three fires, the three poisons. These are all bubbling into and getting into more detail about the problems in the mind. In the Four Noble Truths, you understand craving is the problem. Then you go into the three poisons or the three unwholesome roots, the three fires, and you learn about craving, anger, and ignorance. But then you go deeper and you understand the 10 fetters and these individual pollutions. And that's how you uncover what is true and what is false, because you learn these teachings, you apply the antidotes, and then as your mind is eliminating more and more of this pollution, you see the results that it's working. So the Buddha is encouraging you not to just believe things, but do the work to investigate the teachings. Any questions on this chapter?
I do not see any questions at this time, sir.
Okay, so we will go to chapter 19.
Donnie, would you like to read, or should I read?
I can read. Thank you, Max. To understand even a single sentence, it meant, because if they understand even a single sentence, that will lead to their welfare and peacefulness for a long time.
Okay, so this is just a single sentence, which is explaining that if students understand even a single sentence of the Buddha's teachings, it will be good for their welfare and peacefulness for a long time, right? So when he taught, he didn't cling to his students, right? If you cling to your students, wanting them to learn in totality and really craving for them to get to enlightenment, you're not enlightened yourself as a teacher, but also the student's mind might have the potential to get attached to you as well. So what a teacher needs to do is understand that even if their students understand a single teaching of the Buddhas, just a single sentence, it's good for their welfare and peacefulness for a long time. So like when I teach at the temple, there's students that'll come in and out at different times. And of course, there's students who are learning progressively for a long-term period. But even if a student comes in and sits for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then they might choose to get up and walk out, if they just hear one sentence that they understand about the teachings of the Buddha, this is beneficial for them in their welfare and peacefulness for a very long time. So keep that in mind as you're learning, that perhaps you understand more than a single sentence. So that's very helpful for you to understand, to continue to investigate, continue to examine the teachings. But then also, if you're spending time with a friend or somebody like this and they're having problems with anger and hatred, and all you did was maybe they were open to learning a little bit about loving kindness and you taught them a little bit about loving kindness, if they just understood a single sentence, this is good for their welfare and peacefulness for a very long time. Any questions on this one?
I don't see any at this time, sir.
Okay, so we'll go to the last chapter for today, chapter 20.
I can read it if you'd like, sir.
Sure.
Develop meditation that is like the earth, water, fire, wind, and space. Rahula, develop meditation that is like the earth. For when you develop meditation that is like the earth, arisen agreeable and disagreeable contacts will not invade the mind and remain. Just as people throw clean things and dirty things, excrement, urine, saliva, pus, blood, and blood on the earth, and the earth is not horrified, humiliated, and disgusted because of that. So too, Rahula, develop meditation that is like the earth. For when you develop meditation that is like the earth, arisen, agreeable, and disagreeable contacts will not invade the mind and remain. Rahula, develop meditation that is like water. For when you develop meditation that is like water, arisen, agreeable, and disagreeable contacts will not invade the mind and remain. Just as people wash clean things and dirty things, excrement, urine, saliva, pus, and blood in water, and the water is not horrified, humiliated, and disgusted because of that, so too, Rahula, develop meditation that is like water. For when you develop meditation that is like water, arisen, agreeable, and disagreeable contacts will not invade the mind and remain. Rahula, develop meditation that is like fire. For when you develop meditation that is like fire, arisen, agreeable, and disagreeable contacts will not invade the mind and remain. Just as people burn clean things and dirty things, excrement, urine, saliva, pus, and blood in fire, and the fire is not horrified, humiliated, and disgusted because of that, so too, Rahula, develop meditation that is like fire. For when you develop meditation that is like fire, arisen, agreeable, and disagreeable contacts will not invade the mind and remain. Rahula, develop meditation that is like wind. For when you develop meditation that is like wind, arisen, agreeable, and disagreeable contacts will not invade the mind and remain. Just as the wind blows on clean things and dirty things, on excrement, urine, saliva, pus, and blood, and the wind is not horrified, humiliated, and disgusted because of that, so too, Rahula, develop meditation that is like wind. For when you develop meditation that is like wind, arisen, agreeable, and disagreeable contacts will not invade the mind and remain. Rahula, develop meditation that is like space. For when you develop meditation that is like space, arisen, agreeable, and disagreeable contacts will not invade the mind and remain. Just as space is not established anywhere, so too, Rahula, develop meditation that is like space. For when you develop meditation that is like space, arisen, agreeable, and disagreeable contacts will not invade the mind and remain.
All right. Thank you, Max. So here the Buddha is describing the four elements, and then there's this fifth one that some describe it as an element, some people describe it not as an element. This is how they describe the physical body during the lifetime of the Buddha, where today we talk about bones and fluid and muscle tissue and cells and atoms and things like this. And we might even describe certain diseases and illnesses through those more scientific ways of understanding the body. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they describe the body through these four elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, and then space is the absence of these others. The earth element are the solids of the body, like the bones, the teeth, things like this, the fingernails, the hair. Water are the fluids of the body, like the saliva, the tears, the urine, the blood. The fire is the temperature of the body and oftentimes associated with digestion. And then the wind is the movement, like the bowel movement, the movement of blood and things like this. And then, like I mentioned, space is the absence of these others, because there's certain places in our body that have voids or have space, like the nasal cavity or like inside the ear, things like this. That's the space. And what the Buddha is using here is he's describing these elements and then talking to his son Rahula to develop his meditation where it's unaffected by anything that's going on around you. So if you are meditating and then like a bird starts chirping, or you hear some child calling out to its parent, or you hear a bus or an airplane, the Buddha is explaining to train your mind in meditation where you're unaffected by all of these things, that you don't see there to be agreeable or disagreeable contact through the ears or the nose or the tongue or these other sense bases, that while you're meditating, you can be unaffected by anything and everything. There's a story during the lifetime of the Buddha, I don't know that it's true or not, but there's a story that he was actually in the forest and he was so deep in meditation that there was a flood. It was raining and there was a flood and the water was coming up higher and higher, and he was so deep in meditation he didn't even know that there was a flood in the forest. And there's another part of this where it says there's this snake that coiled up underneath of him and rose him up above the water, and then it protected him with the hood of the snake, over him like an umbrella. I don't know that this is necessarily true or not. You'll see statues and artwork about this. But regardless, you can use this as a depiction for you, not only what the Buddha is sharing here, but also the story, that your meditation should be so deep and you should be unaffected by what's going on around you, that even if your room was flooding or the place where you're meditating was flooding, you wouldn't even know that it was there. That can kind of put that little scratch or itch into perspective, that if you have a little itch and you just feel like you want to itch it or scratch it, that you can train your mind to let that go, seeing that it arises, it changes, and then it fades away. And then by training your mind this way, you can get really deep and a lot of control and discipline of the mind. And you can actually move the mind around in different environments and train in different environments so that you're not meditating in the same exact place all the time. This will challenge the mind and test the mind so that as the mind is experiencing these different impermanence, whether it's lighting, whether it's sound, whether it's smells or other things like this, that your mind can be unaffected during your meditation. And that way, when you're training the mind that way, when you're in daily life, you'll notice that your mind will be unaffected by the impermanence more and more, because you're training your mind in meditation to be unaffected by the impermanence. So therefore, in daily life, your mind will be unaffected by impermanence. What questions do you guys have on this chapter?
I don't see any questions at this time, sir.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you guys reading and all the questions that you asked in this class. Tonka, for you and for others, sometimes I'll ask you questions as you ask me a question. So just know that sometimes I might do that as part of your questions. That just helps me to understand where you're coming from and kind of what you're thinking as part of your question. So thank you all for reading. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your dedication to learning and practicing. And next week in our next week in our Pali Canon and English study group, we're going to be studying the next 10 chapters. That's going to be chapters 21 through 30. And we're in the same book, volume 3. So if you'd like to read those ahead of time, you'll get much more out of the class, because you might have certain questions as you read the words of the Buddha. You might decide to also read those reflections that I'm sharing with you, because in there, you're going to see what I'm sharing with you about how I suggest you reflect on this chapter and potentially implement it into your practice. So that'll kind of inform you more to be able to get more out of the class. Tomorrow in the group learning program, I'm going to be sharing with you the Eightfold Path, which is the path for all humans to enlightenment. So if you are interested in either getting a refresher on that, if you haven't learned that for a while, you can hear me teach that in its totality, step by step and factor by factor, using the words of the Buddha. Or if you've never learned that before with me, you can attend that class and or listen to the replay or recording and be able to get insight into the Eightfold Path. Because anybody anybody who's going to progress to enlightenment, you would need to know that inside and out, backwards and forwards, and implementing it into your daily life to be able to get the benefits and the results of the enlightened mind. And then on Wednesday, we're in part 2 of our 4-part series of Buddhist chanting. I'm teaching the students how to do chanting over the course of 4 individual classes. So you're always welcome to join that as well. So thank you all. I appreciate those of you guys that were reading and asking questions. The moderators, thank you for that as well. I really appreciate that. We'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Sawadee krap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.